Weekly concept, leadership. Essential question. Why do people run for public office? Taking a stand. During the Great Depression, there were a number of hunger marches. All over the country, people marched to protest unemployment, lack of health insurance, and the state of the economy. This photograph was taken in 1932, during one of the marches. If you had been a politician running for office in 1932, what would you have told the voters? What qualities does a good leader need? Talk about it. Write words that you have learned about leadership. Then talk with a partner about what would make you want to run for public office. Vocabulary. Use the picture and the sentences to talk with a partner about each word.
Accompanies. Jake's dog accompanies him on car rides.
Campaign. The woman signed up to work on Mr. Baker's campaign for the state senate. Governor. The governor spoke at a town hall meeting about the state budget. Intend. Does the mouse intend to eat the grape?
Opponent. Laylee and her brother beat the online opponent. Laylee and her brother beat the online opponent they were playing against in the video game. Opponent. An opponent is a person or group that is against another in a fight, contest, or discussion. Opponent. An opponent is a person or group that is against another in a fight, contest, or discussion. Overwhelming. The number of books that Todd had to carry was overwhelming. Overwhelming. Something overwhelming is overcoming or overpowering completely. Overwhelming. Something overwhelming is overcoming or overpowering completely.
Tolerate. Polar bears can tolerate extremely cold water.
Weary. The firefighter was weary and needed to rest after fighting a fire for 10 hours.
Genre, fantasy. The Time Specs 3000. September 15. Dear Grandpa, I just got back from our class field trip to Washington, D.C., and I have a lot to tell you. Going to Washington helped me decide to run for class president. I owe it all to your invention, the Time Specs 3000. In a nutshell, it helped me get some helpful advice about my problem. I intend to tell you everything when I visit Saturday, but for now I've pasted my field notes into this email, so you can understand how well your invention worked. Field Notes, Day 1. I use the Time Specs 3000 at the Washington Monument. Our guide accompanies us everywhere, and while she's talking, I put on the specs. The design needs tweaking because my friend Ken whispered, "Nerdy shades, dude." Immediately I'm seeing the monument in the past. I am watching the ceremony when they laid the cornerstone in 1848, and everybody's wearing large hats and funny old-fashioned clothes. When I take off the Time Specs 3000, I realize my class is heading to lunch, so I run after them. Field Notes, Day 2. We're back on the National Mall, which is nothing like Brookfield's Mall with all its stores. This mall is outside and has a long reflecting pool. My teacher is finding it hard to tolerate some of my classmates' immature behavior, which includes running around throwing pebbles in the reflecting pool. I'm getting kind of weary of all the noise, and I'd rather learn about history on my own. So I put on the Time Specs 3000 and check out the Lincoln Memorial. I see how dignified Lincoln's statue looks, and wonder if I could ever help people like he did. This starts me thinking again about whether I should run for class president. Suddenly, right out of the blue, I hear this voice. "Excuse me, young man, you're thinking of running for president?" I look up and realize that Lincoln's statue is talking to me. It's so overwhelming that I stand there speechless for a minute. Finally, I stammer, "President Lincoln?" "Maybe you should first run for mayor of your town," the statue says, "or perhaps for governor. Once you get the hang of being in public office, you could run for president." "Actually, it's for president of my 4th grade class," I say. The giant statue nods. "That's an excellent start." I figure while I have Lincoln's ear, I should get some advice. I have a problem. I hate writing and giving speeches, and my opponent, Tommy, is great at both things. "What kind of campaign would you run?" Lincoln asks. "I have lots of ideas for our school," I tell him. "For instance, I want our school to use fruits and vegetables from the local farmers market in the cafeteria. I also want to start a book drive for our school library." "There's your speech," he says. "Tell people your ideas with honesty, integrity, and enthusiasm, and you can't possibly go wrong. Thanks, Mr. President, I say. I think I can do that. Grandpa, I can't wait to see you on Saturday because I have to tell you about our visit to the Natural History Museum. Your grandson and future class president, Miguel. P.S. I would advise not wearing the Timex 3000 while looking at dinosaur bones. Make connections. Talk about why Miguel decides to run for class president. What would you do for your school if you were class president? Make predictions. When you read, you can use details from the story to make predictions about what you think will happen. As you read the Timex 3000, make predictions about the story and confirm or revise them. Find text evidence. What kind of invention did you predict the Timex 3000 was? Go back and reread the beginning of the email on page 253. What details helped you to make your prediction? September 15. Dear Grandpa, I just got back from our class field trip to Washington, D.C., and I have a lot to tell you. Going to Washington helped me decide to run for class president. I owe it all to your invention, the Timex 3000. In a nutshell, it helped me get some helpful advice about my problem. I intend to tell you everything when I visit Saturday, but for now I've pasted my field notes into this email, so you can understand how well your invention worked. As I read page 253 of the Timex 3000, I predicted the invention would be a special kind of glasses, because of its name. Your turn. Read page 255 of the Timex 3000. What clues did you find in the text that led you to predict Abraham Lincoln's words would help Miguel solve his problem? The narrator's point of view is how the narrator thinks or feels about characters or events in the story. A story can have a first-person narrator or a third-person narrator. Find text evidence. When I read page 253 of the Timex 3000, I learn that a boy is writing an email to his grandfather. I see the pronouns I, me, and my. So I know this story has a first-person narrator. I can find details in the story to find the narrator's point of view. Graphic organizer. Details. The narrator was weary of the noise his classmates made and wanted to learn history on his own. The narrator wonders if he could ever help people like Lincoln did. Point of view. The narrator is a fourth grader excited by history. He is unsure if he should run for class president. Your turn. Find other details from the Timex 3000 that tell you the narrator's point of view. Put the information in the graphic organizer. Fantasy. The Timex 3000 is a fantasy. A fantasy is a type of fiction story, has characters, settings, or events that could not exist in real life. Usually includes illustrations. Find text evidence. The Timex 3000 is a fantasy. The character of Miguel is realistic, but when he uses the Timex 3000, he is able to see things that happened in the past. Also, some of the illustrations depict events that could not happen in real life. Illustrations. Illustrations show the events of the story. Here we can see what the world looks like viewed through the Timex 3000. Your turn. Find two more examples in the text that show the Timex 3000 is a fantasy. Discuss these examples with your partner. Idioms. An idiom is a phrase or expression whose meaning cannot be understood from the separate words in it. If you are not sure of the meaning of an idiom, look at the surrounding phrases and sentences to help you figure it out. Find text evidence. The phrase, "in a nutshell," on page 253, is an idiom. I know it does not mean that something is really inside the shell of a nut. Miguel says that his grandfather's invention helped him reach a decision. I think that "in a nutshell" means to summarize or say briefly. I owe it all to your invention, the Timespecs 3000. In a nutshell, it helped me get some helpful advice about my problem. Your turn. Use context clues to figure out the meanings of the following idioms in the Timespecs 3000. Out of the blue, page 254. Get the hang of, page 254. Have Lincoln's ear, page 255.
Write about the text. I responded to the prompt. Write an email from Miguel to his grandfather. Describe what Miguel saw when he wore the Timespecs 3000 to look at dinosaur bones. Dear Grandpa, our class visit to the Natural History Museum was awesome, but I'll never ever use the Timespecs 3000 while looking at ancient dinosaur bones again. As soon as I put them on, a pteranodon swooped in front of me. I almost jumped out of my skin. Then I felt hot dinosaur breath on my neck. I didn't want to be dinner for a dino, so I took the Timespecs off as fast as I could. I was so happy to just see old bones again. I'm glad that I didn't look at the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Love, Miguel. Strong opening. I clearly established the situation Miguel is writing about. Grammar. This sentence has two types of pronouns, a subject pronoun and an object pronoun. Descriptive details. I used sensory details to convey Miguel's experience. Develop character. I developed the character by describing his thoughts and feelings. Your turn. Write an email from Miguel to President Lincoln. Have Miguel describe how he felt when he gave his speech for class president. Use details from the story.